Do you want to add some interesting texture and color to your stitching? Why not find inspiration from Victorian Crazy Quilting? Join me and learn how you can use fabric, trims, and thread to add colorful interest to your slow stitching. Today I'm working on a scroll as part of the journal stitch along, but these ideas and techniques can be added to any type of stitching you like. I'm going to be showing how to use simple stitches to embellish, how to use trims to add interest, and I'm also going to show how I use the blanket stitch to create a spider web. So join me and create your own slow stitching piece inspired by Crazy Quilting. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. Today I'm going to be using 6-threaded embroidery floss, and for all my stitching I'm going to be using 2 strands of floss, but you can use as many strands as you like. I'm also going to be using some pearl cotton size 8, and I'm going to be using embroidery needles, milliner's needles, and chenille needles size 24. So I've built a fabric collage in the Crazy Quilt style. This is part of a scroll, so I've made my collage in this one section, and I've used some triangular shapes. I've basted everything down, and I've begun to add some trims. If you want to take a deeper dive into this entire process of stitching inspired by Crazy Quilting, I'm going to link to another video, a full playlist actually, that covers the start to finish process of creating the collage, adding the trims, the stitching, and everything. So for this piece, I'm ready to start choosing my thread colors. So first I've pulled out this coral pink color, and then I've pulled out a light green, and this matches several of the fabrics, and then more of a minty green and a darker turquoise. So this is a really good place to start with colors, and I'm most likely going to add some more colors as I move along. So the first thing to think about once you have all your fabrics in place is to decide how you're going to layer them, which fabric's going to go over top of the other fabric. So in this case, I've got this blue and this green strip right where they're meeting. I want to decide which fabric I'm going to tuck underneath. And with that decision made, I'm going to start adding some stitches here. So I've got my pink color, that coral pink, 2 strands of floss, and I'm beginning to put some straight stitches that are going right across where those 2 fabrics meet. Really simple stitching here. When it comes to being inspired by Crazy Quilting, one of the areas to pay attention to is where 2 fabrics meet. And your options for that are to add stitching where the 2 fabrics meet, any kind of decorative stitching that you like, or to add a trim. So I'm going to do some of both here. So for this first piece, I've chosen to add stitching where the 2 fabrics meet. And now that I've worked my way across, I'm going to turn and go back and make some stitches in between the stitches that I already made. Continuing with straight stitches, I'm just going to vary the length of them. So now that I've added that stitching, I can see this blue strip of fabric that's plain without any decoration. This is going to be a really nice spot to add some kind of stitching. So I'm keeping that in mind as I move ahead to my next step, that's going to be somewhere where I'm going to want to add some hand stitching. So to the right of where I've stitched, I've added a strip of lace. And as you can see, that lace covers up part of that blue area that I was thinking about stitching in. So when it comes to thinking about the order, I decided to add the trim in that area, in this case lace, before adding any stitching to that blue area, so that I know the space that I have to work in for stitching. So I've decided in this blue area that I want to add some French knots. So I'm using that same color of coral pink, and I'm going to move across this piece, adding several French knots. I'm really liking the way that looks already. So I'm going to finish adding French knots there. And then I'm just going to continue to move around the piece, adding stitching and adding trims. So I've added some more French knots, including adding more on the other side of that fabric piece. And I've added a little bit of stitching over on the left as well in that same color. And now I'm going to bring in another color of floss, this time a shade of pink, but darker this time. And I use that color to add French knots to that same area. So the French knots are in two colors. So that adds a little bit of depth and a little bit of interest. So these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about as I'm continuing to stitch. I'm thinking about the colors that I'm using, and I'm going to continue moving around, adding stitch. And there really isn't a right and a wrong way in terms of where to stitch next. It's really just what takes your interest and what draws your eye. So here I've added even more trims on the border of fabrics. I've added some light blue at the bottom. I've added some minty green ribbon right at the top, as well as some really dark hot pink. So there's a few spots that don't have any trims or stitching where the two fabrics meet. So I'm going to make some decisions about adding more stitch, and I'm just going to continue thinking about color. Now, so far, I've only used straight stitches and French knots. Really simple stitches, and so I think I'm going to continue with those two types of stitches as I embellish this further. So here on the left you can see that I've added more pink. These almost look like French knots, but they're really just straight stitches placed closely together. All over the piece I've added either straight stitches or French knots. It's really a matter of taking each little section as a tiny box or triangle shape to work in, thinking about the color that you want to stitch in, adding your stitch, and then moving to the next section. It's really relaxing and enjoyable just to take it little bit by little bit. So I'm fairly happy with the stitching at this point. I may still want to add some more, but at this point I want to look over on the far right, and I'm thinking about adding some white. So I'm bringing out pearl cotton size 8. So up to now I've been using the 6-stranded embroidery floss. And this pearl cotton size 8 is thicker, it's a twisted thread, it's going to look really nice over here. And I've decided that I want to add a spider web, and I'm going to create that using the blanket stitch. And I'm going to show you how I do that. So I'm going to come up right at the bottom of this triangular shape. So I'm thinking about this is the spot where the web's going to start. I'm bringing my thread out, and I'm taking a small stitch over about 1/4 of an inch or a centimeter, and that's going to be the line where I'm going to start creating the blanket stitch. So I put my needle down where that white stitch is, and then I bring it up. So I'm going to hold my thread to the left with my non-dominant hand, and then I'm going to go down, put my needle down right where that stitch is, and come up about 1/4 of an inch away. And because I'm holding that thread in my left hand, I'm creating a loop. So I pull that loop tight, and then I'm going to put my needle down close to where I was before, moving over to the right, and bringing up my needle and pulling that loop tight. And then I'm going to move over to the right again and take another stitch. And I'm going to work my way over to that edge. And then when I get to the very edge there, I'm going to take a stitch straight down, and that's going to anchor that last stitch. And it's not very far away for me to just hop across the back and come back to where my very first stitch was taken of the blanket stitch. I'm going to come up, and then I'm going to pull that first stitch over to the edge and take a stitch down. So there's my first row, and now I can come up and start with my second row. I'm going to come up right in the middle of that first stitch with my needle, I'm going to hold that thread to the left and take a stitch and come up, pulling through that loop. And then I'm going to move to the right and take another stitch. You can sort of angle your stitches where you're not moving very far to the right where your needle's going in and where your needle's coming out. You can start to angle it, making sort of pie shapes almost to try and create that circular web shape. I just keep moving right along till I get to the other edge, and then I take a stitch down, and then I can start on the other edge, same process, and do another row and another row. So I'm going to show how I end my thread. My thread's getting fairly short here, and I'm going to need to thread up with a new piece. So I keep going until it's feeling fairly short. I take my final stitch, and then I just go down right up at the right hand corner of my last stitch, and I go straight down, and then I can tie off at the back. And then to start a new thread, I'm going to come up right in that same spot where I tied off, bring my needle through the inside corner of that last stitch, and then I can just continue. Hold that thread to the left and come up and create my next loop and just continue. And you can't even tell where you stopped and started again. So now I'm going to keep going and make this web shape bigger and bigger. So I'm almost at the very end here. And I'm going to end right at the corner and take that last stitch right on the edge of my piece and then go to the back and tie off. So now that I have my web shape and I'm looking at all the crazy quilting inspired stitching I've done, I can take a final look at it and decide what I want to do next. In some cases, you may want to come in with some colorful floss and stitch right in some of those little boxes that you've made with the web. And that can look really nice. Or you can just leave it like a web. Both would look really nice here. So I'm going to add a little bit more stitching to my crazy quilt inspired piece, and I have an idea about what I want to do with my web. So here I've taken some of the darker pink floss and I've stitched right along the edge of my web and I've outlined it. And I've gone back and added a little bit more stitching in other spots. So let's take a close-up look and start at the left. So I've added some lines of stitching in that large green piece. And then for my crazy quilt inspired block, I have cording, I have lace, I have ribbon that I've put at the junctions where two fabrics meet. I've added straight stitching. I've outlined some of the designs on the fabric with straight stitches. I've added French knots. I've done a little bit of everything. It's been really enjoyable. And I have a little bit more to the right of my web that I can add to this scroll. And this web is going to act as a really nice transition to the next area of stitching that I'm going to add to this scroll. So I hope that this idea of being inspired by crazy quilting has given you some ideas about how you can add lots of color and embellishment to your stitching. And if crazy quilting has sparked your interest, I have a dedicated playlist full of tutorials and ideas on how you can incorporate crazy quilting methods into your slow stitching. And this is my gentle encouragement to dive in and give it a try. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time, happy stitching.